Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What are some of your unforgettably creepy moments? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked at a Golden Corral buffet when I was 18. One afternoon, I showed up for my shift and noticed that our party room that had dividers closed and there was a woman inside sobbing while her husband held her. There were several other people who I'm assuming were family or with the coroner. I asked what was going on, and my manager informed me that an elderly woman had died during the monthly senior citizen lunch, and that they were waiting for her other daughter to get there before they moved the body. I don't know what they were thinking, but that lady was laying on the floor of our buffet for close to 4 hours. It really bothered me how everyone was so unflinching to the fact that on the other side of the plastic divider was a deceased woman and her mourning family. Later, her obituary read that she spent her last moments surrounded by friends and loved ones, which made me feel a little better about it. But as for the day of her passing, everyone just carried on in the race to diabetes. When my grandpa, passed this last August, he went downhill really fast. Leukemia, among other things, and hid until he just couldn't anymore. I was going to the hospital daily after work to try and get him to eat dinner. When they stop eating, death is near. His brother lives across the country, and upon hearing his little brother was checking out soon, he started the drive up. The day he was expected to pass and take off all nutrients and heart meds, and just on pain meds, his brother rolled into town. He walks into the room and holds my opa's hand and slaps her chest a few times, saying, "Opa, you wake up now, I'm here. Slap, slap, slap. Wake up and talk to E." And he gasped and then passed. His heart stopped. His brother technically killed him. I mean, he would have gone that day most likely anyway, but my family is romanticizing in the way that, Opa held on to say goodbye to his brother. But no, his heart stopped in front of my eyes from being pounded on in his fragile state. The almost immediate noticeable difference in skin tone and the slack in the face were the worst. I sat there with my Oma, German grandma, waiting for a few other relatives to say their goodbyes and for Neptune Society to come retrieve the body for cremation. And I was so mad, so appalled at the nurses, because they left his mouth open, all undignified and scary. That death image is burned into my brain, and it's been really hard to remember him the way he was just weeks before he went downhill. Mine is super tame, but that's alright. It still gives me a shiver. When I was 5, my family got a dog, Kata. She was a medium-sized dog that looked like a smaller Belgian Malinois. Anyway, when I was 16 and she was mostly deaf and blind, my family decided it would be in her best interest to put her down. She had a bite record, arthritis, and could no longer use stairs, a problem at both of my parents' houses. When we wanted to take her outside, we'd take her for a run, as we called it. Nothing brought her more joy. On the last day of her life, my dad and I took her to the dog park in his pickup truck. For 2 hours, she ran wildly, pooping and peeing with wild abandon, panting and having a joyous time. When it got to be time to go, we brought her back to the truck and drove to the vet. We get there, and she's weighed and all of that stuff. The entire vet's office was sober. We've been bringing her there since she was 2 years old when we adopted her, and they all had a special bond with her. Soon after, my mom showed up. All 4 of us go into the vet's room and lay her down on the floor. Her first injection goes smoothly. We all kept petting her, repeating that it was okay to go to sleep and that it was all right to close her eyes. Then the second one came. This one was the one meant to kill her. I watched as they drew a little of her blood into the syringe. I watched as her dark red blood mixed with that twisted, disgusting pink. It looks like Pepto-Bismol. To this day, I cannot drink it. Slowly, she is injected in small bursts. I look over and my dad's crying. Everyone is silent. When there's just a few milligrams left, we hoist her limp body onto the exam table and finish the injection, and then we bag her body. From that day, I can't help but to think, what if she was still alive and awake when she was being bagged? What if she would have woken up to a dark environment with no air until she suffocated? Anyways, We drove back to my dad's house and we buried her. I threw some treats over her body before we filled in her grave. When we were finished, my dad started to jump on Kata's grave to pat the earth down to make sure that it wouldn't settle into a crater. I can't get that sound out of my head of his steel-toed boots hitting the dirt where my best friend was lying, dying or dead, who knew? And as he finished, all I could hear was, "Go run, Kata, go run. Get those nasty rabbits off my property. You can catch a squirrel too if you really try hard. Go run, go. TL, DR. The vet's office killed my dog with Pepto-Bismol." Me and my ex-wife used to babysit her sister's children on weekends while she worked. She was a wreck, and the kids were never ready when we got there, so it became pretty routine to get the kids together while Mom ran back and forth freaking out about being late. My ex was always better at getting the two older girls up and dressed, and I could get the baby from the crib to car seat without waking her. I can never forget reaching under her and feeling her so cold and stiff. I went into panic mode, feeling her cheeks and forehead, hoping for warmth, and bringing my face next to her, praying to feel her breath. It never came. I almost passed out a dozen times during the funeral, holding my own breath, watching her and waiting for her to breathe in. Whoa. Well, that story really escalated in a completely tragic way. It seemed like a just kind of matter-of-fact story, possibly about the messiness of a family member, and an infant lost its life. Newborn. Terrible. Sorry. When I was a teenager, I was at a party drinking with some friends at someone's house I didn't know. I heard yelling from the garage, and I walked toward the garage entrance and opened it. At that moment, a teenager had swung a pickaxe at the head of another teenager. The pickaxe went through his skull with a crack and was embedded deep into his brain. He fell onto the floor. People began screaming, and the garage door was open. Kids began spilling out of the house onto the lawn. The guy's friends were crying and screaming as the kid twitched, and brains and blood leaked onto the floor. I remember seeing chunks of brain among the blood as I stood there frozen. People from the house come to look and see what had happened. I stay immobile on the steps into the garage. More kids running by me. A friend grabs my arm and drags me past the kid who's pale, twitching, with a few crying teenagers around him. My friend drags me over the lawn and a few doors down. I sit down to a drink I've managed to keep a hold of, and we walk out onto the main road. My friend hails a cab and we get in. The cab drops me off at my aunt's house where I was living due to being kicked out of my parents for drug addiction and alcoholism. I go downstairs to their liquor cabinet, grab a 26 of rum and drink it all. Black out, wake up on the couch, and had completely forgotten about the incident. I remembered in rehab after about 4 months of being sober off of drugs and alcohol. Destroys me. I should have done something. Dream of those kids' brains on the floor of the garage, the noise a skull makes as it cracks open. One night I'm home alone. I had just gotten a divorce, and as a single mom, I was kind of scared anyway. I lived in a bit out in the country, the kind of place where you can't dial 911 and hope they get there to solve your problems for you. Anyway, I'm smoked out and watching The Big Lebowski when I hear the sound of glass shattering. I was coming from the kitchen. I go to check it out and see a man trying to get in my back door. There's a gloved hand reaching through what used to be a glass pane on the door, and he's reaching for the lock. I panic and run for the door. I don't know why I didn't run to my room and get the gun I kept in there. I hit the door just as he got it open, and my weight knocked him away. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I hear him fall to the ground. I guess I'd hit the door harder than I thought. And then I hear him dust himself off. I heard him mutter, "God damn." I yelled that I had a gun. I guess he believed me. He didn't try to force his way back inside. Instead, I heard him say something like, "I'll come back later." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my kitchen floor with my gun and my baby, hoping he didn't come back. I called the police the next day, but they weren't much help. I tried to put all of that out of my mind and had pretty much forgotten about it until one night when I heard my baby crying. I got up and walked to her room, hoping that she was nearing the end of that whole baby crying in the middle of the night thing. I turned on the light, and written all across her wall in blood red letters were the words, "I told you I'd come back." I heard the downstairs door slam shut. We moved out the next day. Okay. I remember a couple of years ago I was staying at my mom's apartment along with my 2 younger sisters. Then one night, I remember my mom coming out of her bedroom into the kitchen. My sisters soon followed her. I followed, seeing my sisters wrangling a serrated knife out of my mom's hand, telling her not to do it. It wasn't much of a struggle. She let go of the knife and went into the bathroom, locking herself in there. Me and my sisters were trying to talk into unlocking and opening the door and to talk to her, but she never gave a response back. At first, I did hear movement in there, like plastic snapping still being turned on. Our thought process was that she was going to electrocute herself. My sister had a radio in there. I broke down the door and saw a blood-stained sink, and my mother lying in the water-filled tub with slit wrists. I took action, asking for towels to wrap around her wrists. Eventually, the paramedics were called and she was taken to the hospital for care. But afterwards I remember the smell of the bathroom, which I believed was coming from the blood in the sink at that time. A couple of months later, my brother stayed with us. A few days prior, he broke up with his girlfriend. They had been together for a couple of years and he wasn't in high spirits. After a couple of days, I left the apartment for an hour. I got a text that he tried to commit suicide by taking sleeping pills. He was taken to the hospital to have his stomach pumped. But I went into the restroom to remove his clothes. He wasn't naked and apparently was dressed up when he was found. And again, I smelled that strange smell that had occurred when my mother tried to commit suicide as well. Days later, I found he had written a note on the mirror, which could only be seen through the condensation after a hot shower. It had his name spelled out, first, middle, and last name, his birthday, and the day he tried to commit suicide, with the words, "I'm sorry." I used to work in a small town for their community service when I first started in the field. We had a handful of creepy and weird sights, but the one I will never forget was a 9-year-old who had committed suicide. The house was well kept with 2 cars in the driveway. We were sent there for a child with difficulty breathing, pretty standard in the winter with all the asthma and viruses going around. I remember walking into the house and greeting the parents who were watching TV, not really paying attention to the fact we were there. I asked the mother where the child was, and she responded with, "Upstairs." We walked upstairs, and I entered the room to find her daughter. She had constructed a noose and hung herself with her canopy bed. The sight of that lifeless child's body will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was like a doll. It just didn't look real. We attempted to revive her and transported her to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead shortly after. I'll never forget the calmness of those parents, that house, the number of steps I walked up, 12, the layout of the bedroom, the number of stuffed animals on her bed, or anything else if I ever wanted to. The parents were charged and sent to jail. I refused to learn why or anything else about the call. I just hope that whatever pain she felt has ended. This isn't so much creepy, and it doesn't even begin to compare to the disturbing comments on here, but it pretty much wrecked me for a while. So I think it belongs here. My mom became very depressed this past year, and while I was on vacation, she told her best friend she was going to succeed where I hadn't. I attempted suicide as a teen and kill herself. She told her friend because she wanted her body gone before my brother or I found her. Needless to say, we got her into a facility and tried to get her help. It was essentially useless, and she went back to her despair. I woke on a bright and sunny Saturday morning to a message on Facebook from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. She lives in Georgia. I'm in Ohio, telling me to call her. I called and was told to look at the newspaper. I read my mother's obituary. I can't even begin to describe how I felt reading those words. I simply lost it. I fell to my knees on the kitchen floor sobbing, so dizzy I almost passed out. I began retching so hard I almost didn't make it to the bathroom in time. I didn't have anyone's number to call. I live an hour from where my mom had been staying and her phone was off. My boyfriend drove me to where she had been staying, and I found her there, asleep in her bedroom. The paper had published her obituary, which she had placed without it having been verified or even paid for. It still makes me ill thinking about it. The best one I can think of is actually my own, which is kind of sad. I was in 6th grade and we had PE class along with 7th graders. At that point, it was just before class had started and we were in the changing room. There was this one 7th grader who really pissed me off for some reason. I don't remember it clearly, but he was some kind of alpha male douchebag. So I made a hurtful remark, to which he retorted by punching me in the gut and calling my mother a whore. I don't quite clearly remember what happened afterwards because I was overcome by some kind of, I guess blood rage would be the closest term. Now I have quite a temper, but when I got angry at any point before or after that, it just hasn't felt the same. I don't know what triggered it, but to recall, it is quite unsettling. It's like there was a red mist covering my vision, and I had lost control of my body, which was acting on its own, but my mind was on fire with only one thought, completely dominant over everything else. I wanted to see the bastard dead. As I said, my own memory is quite hazy because I only remember how I filled and empowered by a savage fury, but what I was told was basically this. I had one hand around his throat. I hit puberty early and was quite large for my age at that time, basically choking him to death whilst banging his head against a wall. When his friends tried to help him, I just beat them back and kept choking him until he started turning blue, which is when the gym teacher came and barely pulled me away with the help of the other boys in the room. Although no long-term damage was done, I had nearly strangled him. The strangest bit is how my mom managed to cover it all up somehow, and I got away with it with just some visits to a therapist. Still, to this day, every time I recall that event, I feel repulsed by what I did and how I acted, and am afraid that it might happen again. This is why the story creeps me out. I just had one. I've lived in my apartment for almost 2 years now, and one of the lamps in one of my bedroom apartments have never worked. I've been annoyed by it since I moved in, but the lamps with the right sockets are bloody hard to find. Actually did find some one day, but the light just flickered and then never lit up again. Skip to 2 weeks ago. The landlord hired contractors to change some defective parts of our front door locks. I left the key in the key tube for almost a week before they fixed it, whatever it was. Skip to tonight. I got home from work, vacuumed and brought some friends over, saw Total Recall and ate pizza. We dimmed the lights during the movie, but it was a time to leave. My friend hit the light switches. "Oh, your kitchen lamp is working now? What? Oh, no, it shouldn't. What? No, there's no lamp in it. Well, there was, but it never worked. What the hell?" Friend flicks it off and then on again. Lamp doesn't light up again. What the hell? He tries different combinations of the light switch mode and to surge Pokemon gym, but nothing seemed to work. So either there's some really weird electrical glitch, or I have an evil lamp spirit in my apartment. Pretty sure there's an evil lamp spirit. I saw a drunk driving accident when I was 13. I'm pretty sure we had arrived right after it crashed. No one was outside yet, and he was still moving. His truck looked like a crumpled tin can. The man didn't even look like a man anymore. His head was twisted, his stomach to the ground, with his head to the sky. My dad and I got out and tried to help him. I still regret getting out of the car. I'd never seen a dead person before. Well, I'd gone to funerals, but not the ugly kind of death with blood and guts. He tried talking to us, but blood just rushed out of his mouth so many times he kept trying to say something. All we could hear him were mumbles and gurgling screams. That's the part I couldn't even shake. Those damn screams. People started coming out, some crying, some calling the police, and some just standing there. He died on the way to the hospital. He was about 25 and just became a father. His wife was widowed with a 3-month-old baby. My dad tried a bunch of times to contact her just to let her know we saw him and his struggling. She never returned any calls.